This video is hard for me to make because I can't wrap it up with a neat little bow. I need my emotional support cat. So helping and understanding people grow and heal has been something that I have wanted to do ever since I entered college, and I was very passionate about that work. I entered college so excited to just be a part of the field and learn. In my junior and senior year of college, I really started to have some feelings towards psychology that made me feel like I wasn't sure if I could continue on the path to pursuing some sort of clinical psychology research. I'm going to start by talking about some of my personal qualms with psychology, and then I'll move into why it made me uncomfortable and made me feel like I wasn't able to continue doing that work. I think clinical psychology has a very scientific framework and approach of using neuroscience to understand and try to find solutions for mental illness. At least from what I was involved in with my work, I felt like a lot of it was trying to understand the base neuroscience in order to understand the mental illness itself. However, in the history of actually applying psychology and psychiatry to treating mental illnesses, a lot of the treatments were discovered basically in trial and error. For example, medications for depression, Parkinson's, schizophrenia were all used to treat patients because the side effects that the medications had for other things seemed to have an effect on people's mental state. Using electrical shocks to treat the brain for depression was also something that was completely started as a trial for someone who was really depressed. They just thought, well, at this point, we might as well just try this. And I think the person who first had the electrical shock therapy was also a physician at the hospital, so they just wanted to try their best to help him, and they were like, we can just have him do this experimental therapy for us. My point with bringing up these examples is that a lot of the treatments in psychology and these medications that we discovered that now treat mental illnesses were discovered by accident before we understood the neuroscience or what was going on in the brain to define any sort of pathology and actually develop a targeted treatment towards it. And in most cases, even now, we don't have a clear defined pathology in the brain that can point to what causes these mental illnesses. And of course, we're humans, so there's a lot more than just the chemistry and biology that goes on in our brain. Our experiences shape that. There's not just one defined path to an illness, but sometimes I think the very neuroscientific biological framework creates misinformation downstream because people understand biology and they understand diseases that are biological. One example of this is the serotonin hypothesis, which was an old theory developed in the 1900s that low serotonin was leading to depression. The serotonin hypothesis is not a supported theory anymore, and it's been debunked a number of times, finding no associations between serotonin levels and depression. However, I remember when I was sitting in my intro to neuroscience class, there was this slide that showed that antidepressants work by making serotonin levels higher in the brain. So then in my own brain, I had correlated that means that if antidepressants treat depression by making serotonin levels higher, that means that depression is when serotonin levels are lower. I think it's misconceptions like this that really spread into misinformation, especially in popular media. All the time I see online that people say that mental illness is just a chemical imbalance in the brain, even though this rhetoric has not been supported in the scientific community. But I think because of the framework of using medications that target neurotransmitters, which cures the illness, it causes people to draw this conclusion. Another example of this is I've seen rhetoric where people say that, would you tell a diabetic not to take their insulin? And they compare that to taking antidepressants for depression. Under no circumstances should anyone ever feel stigma around taking any medication, but this analogy is just not the full truth because for insulin, there are established levels of insulin in the body, and that is something that we can measure with a blood test. For antidepressants, there's not a clear marker for what level of serotonin there has to be in your body for you to not experience the effects of depression because the serotonin hypothesis has been proven false. The thing with a medicalized approach of thinking that mental illnesses come from a neurobiological cause is that people start to believe that recovery is not something within their own agency because it's something wrong with their brain. I keep using the case of depression as an example here, but in many cases cases, people can recover from depression and experience remission and heal on things that may have caused them to experience those symptoms in the first place. However, if you truly believe that your depression is caused by a neurochemical imbalance in your brain, you will think that medication is like the only solution and that you have to take medications because you don't have enough neurotransmitters in your brain. I really found issue with this because I felt like it was taking agency away from the person to see themselves as like resilient and able to heal. And studies have shown that people who do hold those beliefs believe that they need antidepressants. Antidepressants are not bad, and I firsthand have experienced the positive effects that they can have. Antidepressants are a tool, they are not like some answer to a biological deficiency. I think the idea of a lifetime maintenance of depression by like taking antidepressants or some sort of medication because you believe that it's a biological imbalance is harmful, as it doesn't like empower someone to treat their feelings as valid. People can be encouraged to be curious about their feelings and ask where they come from instead of thinking that they have to suppress them with the medication because the feelings are coming from a biological imbalance. Sorry if that was a little convoluted. I'm not sure how to best explain it. I think where this hit the most for me was like the ethical implications of treating kids with medications. Kids have a lot less agency than an adult does because in a lot of cases in the clinic and just in general when you're a kid, your parent speaks for you. Kids also don't understand like feelings the same way because as a kid you don't have a reference for the world. For example, if you gave a kid a questionnaire, a very standard questionnaire, and you ask them, do you feel despair? Depending on like what they think is despair, what they think it means, depending on like how they grew up in their context, they might mean something completely different than what like you and me as adults would answer for that question, because we have a frame of reference that's shaped by the world around us that we all have sort of come to agree to. You like watch shows, you see other people, and you're able to gauge those feelings in that way. So with kids already having limited agency, I remember when I was doing a lot of my own research and just reading, there was a lot of research published on like using medications like antidepressants in kids, and papers published from top institutions would be sponsored by the big pharma companies that made the medications in the first place. This was confusing to me, and I just remember this one day I was sitting in my lab and I was reading this paper that was by some professor at like a top institution, and they were writing like a literature review on antidepressant usage in kids, and every section of the paper going through like different types of effects. In this diagram you can see like the placebo is performing at the same as the antidepressant for the positive effects, and with that diagram the researcher had commented, out of this entire trial only less than 1% of kids had suicidal ideation, and this proves that the medication is safe. And so after this whole paper listed the conflicting and mixed results, in the conclusion it just said antidepressants are highly recommended for clinical treatment and are completely safe. That made me feel like very conflicted and kind of crazy because the paper had clearly talked about like a lot more than that, and that wasn't the conclusion that I would have taken away from reading the rest of it, but that was the conclusion, and this was research funded by Big Pharma. In my statistics class, we were shown that there's a graph that you can make to see like the distribution and randomness of a study, and in this certain study you could see that like there's a missing chunk, and that means the data was basically cherry-picked to support the claim that this antidepressant is safe and effective. There was also the Paxil study where the drug company said that it was safe for kids even though they had never done any testing in kids, and that was like some sort of scandal. I think with the whole biological basis, biological heavy neuroscience framework for clinical psychology, as well as the downstream effects on kids and like them not having agency, drug companies trying to sell these drugs to them and prove that they're safe even without necessarily that scientific rigor. I feel like for me that really diminished like the human side of psychology, because I'm passionate about psychology because I really want to help people and help them heal. I don't really want to be like recommending them medication or like be part of that knowledge creation process that I don't like fully believe in. I think it's kind of hard for me to talk about because I didn't feel like other people who were studying psychology felt the same way as me, and that made me kind of feel like I was crazy, and for some reason I couldn't like feel the like do good mentality. It felt really painful to stay in the field as I was doing my own reading and witnessing my own experiences in the clinic. While I worked in the field of clinical psychology, I really wished that I could have faith and not feel isolated the way I did. I was looking online for if anyone had like a similar experience or felt the same way as me, but I also didn't really find that, and that's why I wanted to talk about this a little bit. Of course, there's always the be the change you want to see, but I think at the time when I was still in college, I just felt sort of demoralized, and I thought this is not the approach that I want to take to really help people heal and grow and return to my original mission that I had come into psychology with. So when I was in my junior year, I actually added a major of anthropology, which takes a very like human-centered approach. Anthropology really brought like a different way of viewing the world and a different framework, making the human-centered approach as the truth, since everyone is valid and it's not like anyone's fault that they're feeling a certain way or they're perceiving things a certain way. And I really appreciated that perspective. I'm still like deeply passionate and curious about being involved in psychology because I do feel like I still hope that one day I can help people grow and heal. I think I'm just trying to find the best way for me to do that. Maybe I'll be a therapist when I'm older, but I also never really imagined myself as like a 20-year-old therapist. I had thought that I would work in research for a bit and contribute to like the system of knowledge, but after my experiences, I think that's not something that I would like to pursue at this time. I work in tech now, but I'm still leaving the door for future opportunities to be involved in the space. Life is all about learning and taking the most that you can out of your experiences. I'm really grateful for all the experiences I've had, and I think I've learned a lot about my own views and my own perspective. This has just been my experience so far and something that I wanted to share.